Hi, everybody, and welcome to Robust American Love. My name is Karen Carboner, and I am president of the Walt Whitman Initiative. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to celebrate New York's literary legacy. We serve as an organizing center for cultural activism and poetry-related events, just like the one that you're about to enjoy. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Tune into our YouTube channel to explore more presentations in our Robust American Love speaker series. And if you like what we're doing, there are many ways to support our programs and initiatives. You can visit our website to find out how, or simply write to Walt at waltwhitmaninitiative.org. We love your suggestions. Keep them coming. Robust American Love is thriving. We are still going strong now once a month. And those of you that have tuned in before, you know that we decided to offer this, and noting the word speaker in the title, right? It's not a lecture series. It's actually a speaker series. It's meant to be more casual and timely. We explore aspects of Whitman's life, work, and legacy. You're going to hear many different sorts of conversations, enjoy presentations by teachers and poets and grad students, artists, printers, neighborhood activists, and you name it. They're not academic talks, but free, open, and informal discussions that we end with a Q&A. So please, if you're watching on YouTube Live, you can enter your questions into the chat section. And we should be able to get those. We have a lot of people up here tonight, so hopefully we can get some of the questions. But anyway, we'd love to see them up there. So please send us your remarks and your questions. Just a word on next month's presentation, Tuesday, March 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. We are very honored to present Brooklyn poet An Evening with Jason Koo. Jason, also a tremendous friend, a tremendous Brooklynite. Some of you probably know him very well from Brooklyn Poets. That's his organization that he founded, and he's the executive director of. He was also cited as one of the 100 most influential people in Brooklyn culture by Brooklyn Magazine. He's got beautiful books of poetry out. I've got a bunch of them right here. Jason, I know you're watching. I can't wait to talk about these with you. And I even have from the 2019 celebration of Whitman's 200th birthday, What Is It Then Between Us? A beautiful anthology that Brooklyn Poets put out celebrating Whitman for 200 years. So that featured a lot of the poets that are active in Jason's Brooklyn Poets organization. Please go to their website to see the wonderful things that they're doing and the sort of events that they offer. Tonight, we have a very special presentation. The title of it is Local Heart and Global Impact, a tribute to Whitman specialist Greg Trupiano. You are about to enjoy a poetical, visual, and musical tribute to Greg. Greg was many, many different things. He was a sought-after Whitman specialist and director of the much beloved Walt Whitman Project based in Brooklyn, tour guide extraordinaire, Whitman Initiative founding member, and of course, our very dear friend. Greg's local cultural activism had a reach far beyond his beloved Brooklyn, and today we're going to celebrate just a few of the ways Greg exemplified the philosophy of thinking globally and acting locally. You are going to hear from many different people that represent different facets of Greg's social and cultural activism. Lon Black is with us, Dee Quee is here, Brad Vogel, Charles Jardin, Julian Macron, Karin Coonrod, and Nicole Mitchell. And I will introduce each of them as they step up and say a few words. You all know that this is an hour show and we've got lots of people to go. So I've told everybody to try to hold their talking to about 7 minutes. Hopefully that leaves a little bit of time at the end for us to converse, and if anything, for your questions. So if you have something to share about Greg, do put it in the chat, and hopefully we can get to that as well. Before I introduce Lon, I guess I wanted to say a few words about my very dear friend. I was trying to think about when I actually got to know Greg. This must have been the late 90s because I remember I was still in grad school at Columbia and a budding Whitmaniac. I was just beginning to veer off of my study of British Romanticism and go crazy on Whitman. A friend of mine noticed the Walt Whitman Project website and said, "You've got to get to know this guy." And indeed, of course, I did. Greg totally shifted the direction of my life's work from academia to a blend of traditional and public scholarship. I am very, very proud that the beginnings of my cultural activism started with my friend Greg. And I wanted to show you all just a few images. I also am going to limit myself to just the few minutes that I have, and excuse the lo-fi nature of our program, but it's all heart. So sharing my screen and bringing you to a presentation of a few photos. And we have here my first photo, and I'm going to make this smaller so we can concentrate on it. This was taken on September 27th, 2016, which is officially the founding date of the Whitman Initiative. A brainchild of four of us. You see in the photo here, Ed Centeno, a longtime Whitman collector and also a dear friend, Zach Cooperman, who was a reader at the Song of Myself Marathon, who really got us together and established this 501c3. And then, of course, there was Greg, who was our advisor from the very beginning. And we met at Whitman's down on East 9th Street, a favorite place, of course, of all of us. And on that fateful night, now almost going on 5 years, we founded this organization as a cultural activist organization. It would not have happened without Greg. Next up, let's see. Am I able to switch? Yeah, there's this photo, and I'm just presenting you all with a few of the many photos that I have, but this one is definitely a favorite. On June 25th, 2014, I brought one of my many Whitman classes, my students down Ryerson Street, to see the house in which Whitman completed Leaves of Grass. And for those of you that have been following our initiatives, you know that we have been on a mission to landmarks this house to make sure that it stays for posterity. We are just about to reactivate our initiative based on the wonderful incident that 227 Duffield, Abolitionist Place, was landmarked by the LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, just last month. So we're going to also reactivate our efforts to save what we call the Leaves of Grass house. And one of the few times we were allowed to go inside that house, I am sure the reason that we got in was Greg's spirit. You can see him in the middle of this photo. We're in the lobby of 99 Ryerson Street, and the students around all smiling, right? They're feeling that energy, but it looks like Greg is actually on fire from that energy, right? Like he's glowing. I just love that image of him there. And then finally, this one, which Lon, I'm so grateful that you dug this one up recently. This was actually the second time we offered the Song of Myself Marathon. And that's Lon Black, Greg's partner of over 36 years on the right. And of course, Greg is on the left. We're down at the South Street Seaport. That's the first place the Song of Myself Marathon started in 2004. And Lon just sent me this photo a couple of days ago, and it brought back such memories. And I looked back to see who the readers were early on. And sure enough, Lon was there. Lon was there in 2004, 2005, but Greg's name was missing. So I wrote to Lon and I said, why? I know he was there. And then I recalled that at the very beginning, Greg was actually quite shy. He did not want to read at the Song of Myself Marathon. So for many years, he just enjoyed being there. He was a fantastic supporter. I will never forget it. It could not have happened without him, but he just kind of sat back and let the poetry wash over him until one day there was a reader, a no-show, and Greg filled in. I think that was our 1 year that we were at the Brooklyn Public Library. And from then on, Greg not only participated, but he actually took hold of the biggest section of Song of Myself, which is divided up into 52 sections. Section 33 is by far the longest section. I always had trouble assigning that section until Greg decided that not only was he going to read at the marathon, he was actually going to read section 33. So for me, this photo of Greg out on the Pier 1 of Brooklyn Bridge Park, and that's where we have been holding the reading until we went virtual last year. This is the image of Greg that I carry with me wherever I go. His beloved city around him, Brooklyn before him, and the words of Whitman within him. And just, Lon, before I introduce you, I just want to read a little part of section 33, which I will never, ever go by without thinking of Greg and the magnificence that he brought to this particular section. I understand the large hearts of heroes, the courage of present times and all times, how the skipper saw the crowded and rudderless wreck of the steamship and death chasing it up and down the storm, how he knuckled tight and gave not back 1 inch and was faithful of days and faithful of nights, and chalked in large letters on a board, "Be of good cheer, we will not desert you." How he saved the drifting company at last, how the lank, loose-gowned women looked when boated from the side of their prepared graves, how the silent, old-faced infants and the lifted sick and the sharp-lipped, unshaved men. All this I swallow and it tastes good. I like it well and it becomes mine. I am the man. I suffered. I was there. Thank you so much, Greg, for bringing that passage to life and bringing Whitman to life for so many of us. I'd like to now introduce Lon Black. Lon, as I was saying, I think actually, Lon, I made a mistake. You were partners for over 38, not 36 years. Lon was also associate artistic director of the Walt Whitman Project, which was Greg's brainchild. Lon also has a theater background. Anyone who's heard him recite knows this. He was a reader for many years for the Walt Whitman Project and designed the marketing materials and programs for these events. For the last 16 years, he has worked in the animal wellness field as a massage therapist, acupressurist, and Reiki Master for cats and dogs. His internet presence is focused on bodywork for senior cats, and we know him as the Cat Masseur. Lon, will you step forward and please tell us a bit about your Greg? And you can go right ahead, Lon. You're on.
Hello. I can't see myself. Should I be able to, or?
I don't know if that matters, but you are on the screen. We can see you, so you're just fine. Yeah.
Okay. Read these leaves in the open air. That was Whitman's advice for the 1855 preface to Leaves of Grass. And Greg followed that advice by launching the Walt Whitman Project in 2000, where we did just that and beyond. We read these leaves, we sang these leaves, we listened to newly composed music inspired by these leaves. I think Walt would have approved of all of this. Now, going back further in time, the first Whitman event that Greg produced was 15 years before he launched the Walt Whitman Project. It was on May 18th, 1985. It was in the chapel of the First Unitarian Church in Brooklyn Heights. It was a marathon reading of Specimen Days. There were many readers. It took 11 hours to complete. 15 years later, Greg starts the Walt Whitman Project. Our first event was on October 14th, 2000, and the subject was Specimen Days, selections from, not the whole thing. And here is the program. It was a 4-hour event at Brooklyn Heights branch of Brooklyn Public Library at Cadman Plaza West and Tillery Street, just a couple of blocks from where the Rome Brothers print shop stood, where the first edition of Leaves of Grass was published. And 15 minutes before the reading began, on the steps of the Brooklyn Borough Hall, a couple of blocks away, a brass quartet played a piece that Greg commissioned his friend Paula Kimper to compose, Fanfares for Specimen Days. It was 3 fanfares, and then the reading began. Greg wrote a welcome paragraph for the program, which I think is almost Whitmanic in its energy. See what you think. He begins by quoting a line from Specimen Days. "If I do it at all, I must delay no longer." So reads the first line of Walt Whitman's 1882 memoir, Specimen Days. This sentiment also sums up my reasons for selecting today to be the day that the Walt Whitman Project produces its inaugural event, a reading of selections from Specimen Days. Today does not commemorate, to the best of my knowledge, some anniversary in Whitman's life or a great happening in American history. Instead, today is a seizing of the moment. Let's begin now, learning more about the life and work of Whitman, perhaps America's greatest and most influential poet. I can think of no better way to start this journey than by offering selections from Specimen Days. It is Whitman's own story, and a damn good one. We produced so many events over the almost 20 years of our existence, readings, tours, indoors, outdoors, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Long Island at the birthplace. Greg commissioned composers to create musical pieces that were used or were inspired by Whitman's words. Notable years for us were 2005, the 150th anniversary of the publication of Leaves of Grass. Lots of events that year. In 2019, Whitman's 200th birthday. Beginning in 2004, we had our annual Whitman birthday bashes. After so many events, it became clear to me that Whitman's words took on a different vibrancy when they are heard and when they are performed. I felt that way when I was a listener and when I was a reader, and Greg knew this too. This is the Whitman book that Greg relied on most, the Library of America. I think books are infused with the energy of their previous owners. These are Greg's bookmarks. I just couldn't bring myself to remove them. This is actually Greg's second copy. His first copy, he probably purchased in the early 80s when this was first published. And that copy would have about 25 years of his energy in it. But one day, Greg left that copy open on one of his work tables, and one of our cats decided that he would infuse his energy with it by vomiting all over it. So this was the second copy that I got for Greg. So 2 days from now will mark a year since Greg's passing. And over this past year, I've had to select a few pieces of Whitman to read at tributes to Greg. And I wanted to pick something different for today, and I've had some difficulty choosing that. I don't think I ever asked Greg, so Greg, what's your favorite Whitman poem? I mean, I figured, how could he possibly answer that? So a week ago, when I was still having problems, I just asked, Greg, what's your favorite Whitman poem? And I got the answer right away. The Calamus Cluster. Of course, he loved the Calamus Cluster. Obviously, I can't read it all here, but I knew immediately what poem I would select from it. For me, some of the most transcendent moments in Whitman's poetry is when he plays with quantum time, when Whitman brings himself to life when you're reading him, like in Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Consider you who peruse me, whether or not I may in unknown ways be looking upon you. When I read that, I can sense Walt looking upon me. And in this past year, I have sensed Greg looking upon me. So the poem I selected is the last one in the cluster. It's Walt speaking to me, and it's Greg speaking to me. Full of life now. Full of life now, compact, visible. I, 40 years old, the 83rd year of the States, to one a century hence, or any number of centuries hence, to you yet unborn, these seeking you. When you read these, I that was visible and become invisible. Now it is you, compact, visible, realizing my poems, seeking me, fancying how happy you were if I could be with you and become your comrade. Be it as if I were with you. Be not too certain, but I am now with you. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, Lon, thank you so much. What an incredible tribute. And just hearing about the accomplishments and the work of the Walt Whitman Project, oh my goodness, makes me mourn what we will lose for it not being here, but also makes me think we should honor this history somehow. And maybe our next presenter, Dee Quee, has some ideas about this. Dee is a member of the Whitman Initiative. She's a storyteller who uses writing, photography, and videography to tell stories about social justice. And she actually made a documentary film that features Greg called Song of Ourselves, Cultural Activism in Whitman's New York. We're going to show a part of that tonight after she gives a bit of a presentation here. That film premiered at International Whitman Week in celebration of Whitman's bicentennial in 2019. Dee completed her master's degree in historic preservation at Pratt, where she explored cultural heritage, public history, gentrification, and other urban issues also very dear to Greg. In her work with different communities in New York City and community-based organizations, she always brings a creative touch and empathy. Dee, are you out there, my dear? Here she is. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Lon, for the great introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dee. I am a storyteller and social activist who is interested in supporting resilient communities in New York City. I had the honor to meet Greg and got to know his amazing work with the Walt Whitman Project 2 years ago when I was working on my documentary film that Karen just mentioned, Song of Ourselves, Cultural Activism in Whitman's New York. Through Greg's walking tour and cultural programming, I really saw firsthand how he was introducing Whitman to a wider public and demonstrated that Whitman was still pretty much present and relevant in the 21st century. Greg's words and action really resonated with me and what I hope to convey through my film, which is why we should still read Whitman these days and discuss his ideas. And more importantly, how we can support communities that Whitman envisioned with democracy and equity in mind. In the film, Greg's passion for Whitman's poetry and for New York City really came through Without further ado, I'd like to show a section where he touched on his parallel with the poet and the importance of community. Now let's hear from Greg directly.
Okay, and I'm going to unmute myself and share the screen and go to YouTube, where if you wish, the audience can view this film also, but we're going to just watch a clip of it tonight.
Whitman loves music and loves opera during the 1840s, which was a time of tremendous expansion of opera production in New York City. As he said, he was on the free list. He was getting complimentary tickets to go see and to review operas. And he fell in love with this genre, a genre which at first he was not interested in and which he wrote negatively about. Well, he really changed about that. As a matter of fact, Italian opera becomes a major influence on his poetry. I feel I have so much in common with him because I too am an opera fan, and indeed I make my living by producing opera, sometimes here in New York, mostly in Florida. A few things coming up, all related to Walt. Walt, one of America's greatest writers. Also, like Whitman, I want to create community. I feel it's so important with what I do with the Walt Whitman Project, just to remind people that what they see here and now had a different age, a different life to it. And I think sometimes we just need to relax and breathe a little bit more easily and remind ourselves that the way things are is not how they always were. And how were they? And how can we connect to that? And how should that guide us to the future? I find so discouraging what's going on right now in Brooklyn, which just seems to me there's just this senseless overdevelopment of buildings too tall and streets becoming overly crowded and actually encroaching even here on what I feel is the airspace of the park. Whitman was so right when he said that to have successful democracy in America, even in an urban area, we need reference, we need access to nature.
And I wish that I could show more now, but I think we are going to go back to Dee. Dee, any last words about that?
Thanks for showing the film. I think Greg's words really speak for himself, and I really hope that people will get a chance to meet Greg. For those of you who've met him, or for those of you who will be meeting him in the film. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee. It is really moving to see that footage so beautifully done by Dee Quee and her sensitive portrayal. And somehow, Dee, you got him to say these things that we just like hang on every word. And wonderful to see him looking so full of life. And in fact, Brad Vogel, who is coming up next, the way that Greg looks in that movie reminds me of the poem that you were about to recite. I know that you have written a poem in Greg's honor. Brad is the author of the poetry collection Broad Meadow Bird, which was a finalist for the 2020 Erskine J. Poetry Prize. And his poetry has appeared in various places, including Smartish Pace, the Freshwater Review, Solitary Plover, Deadline Gowanus, and elsewhere. He founded the Brooklyn Book Festival's annual Gowanus Dawn reading in canoes. If you do not know about this, oh my goodness, you must look that one up. Also, the New York City Poets Afloat residency and reading series, which is aboard ships instead of canoes. And he co-created Whitman After Dark, an after dark group read ramble. So just from that, you can see that Brad shares some of the wonderful Whitmanic creativity that we saw in our Greg. Brad, are you out there?
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate it. And Greg really was a true inspiration in terms of his ability to take an idea and something that related to Whitman and to bring it to life in the real world in some way and actually get other people involved and engaged. And I just saw he had this optimism about the ability to do that really was infectious. And before I read the poem, I did want to note one thing, because I don't know that everyone out there knows one thing that Greg did with Whitman, and I'm going to try to see if I can share a file here in the chat, see if we can find it. But Greg participated in another poetry event that was an annual reading of Whitman's poem, The Centenarian Story. Now, this is not a Whitman poem that you necessarily hear about all that often. It's essentially a recounting of the memories of a young soldier in the Union Army as he's about to go off to war in the Civil War, speaking with an ancient veteran of the Revolutionary War. And it's a bit of a clunker, a bit of a chestnut of a poem, but characteristically, Greg got into it, came down to the Gowanus Canal where we were having this group reading, and then, elevated it, as he so often would, by adding an opera singer the next year and lifting that event that some might have dismissed as irrelevant into something that became really meaningful and moving and powerful. And I feel like that was just the quintessence of what he was able to do so often to all of our collective delight in his life. But this is a poem that I wrote about Greg the day after I learned that he had passed away last year. Cobalt and periwinkle left a love child who breathed into pre-dawn's first faint neon tube. A phantom finger on the dimmer, hoisting day, up infinitesimally onto blue stage atop Fort Greene Park. The lungs of Brooklyn, the Plazic stones, the columned tomb, the dormant lilac grove, ask and ask into morning air, where are you, Trupiano? Do you too, Greg, stop somewhere waiting? What tour are you scouting for us now? How ample are these hills of Brooklyn? So thank you to Lon for being here today and for everyone in the Walt Whitman Initiative, but Greg Trupiano truly was a core part of this effort and a core part of making so many very good things happen.
Absolutely agreed, Brad. So from one fantastic and effective cultural activist to Greg, thank you so much for that beautiful poem that evokes both Whitman and Greg so strongly. I'm profoundly moved and appreciate that idea of actually writing Greg a poem. I know he would love it. We are moving to another dear, dear friend of Greg's, Charles Jardin, who was the general director of the Brooklyn-based American Opera Project from 2002 to 2019, and has been the board member of the Fort Greene Park Conservancy since 2003. He was actually the board chair from 2006 to 2020. Charles produces music concerts, opera productions, poetry events, and tours throughout Brooklyn and the outer boroughs, many combining local history and site-specific themes. And he did some incredible work with Greg. I remember actually, Charles, maybe the one on my mind the most these days is the 2018 Brooklyn Historical Society event, but you've done so many wonderful things, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks. Oops. Thank you. Can people hear me?
And see you. Excellent.
Excellent. Great. And Karen, do you have any of the pictures to show? No big deal if you don't.
I do. I actually will share my screen. And do you want them up as you're speaking?
Yeah, just whatever time frame moves you.
Sure.
I'm trying to get my little presentation here. Okay, so hello everybody, and it's really wonderful to be here with all of you who are so close to Greg. And I'm going to put a new label on Greg tonight. So although Greg was too modest and humble to proclaim himself a poet or a professor, I am professing tonight that Greg was a poet, a true poet in every possible meaning of the label. Greg's volumes of walking tours of his beloved Brooklyn, many of which we, his colleagues, worked alongside him to produce, were enacted like performance art pieces, where poetry and song conspired with his narration to send eloquent messages, poems within poems within poems. Greg's tours were what literature terms occasional poetry, created in reaction to a place or an event. Greg's tours were Valentines to Brooklyn, the sites in the borough that he cared about and worried about. Greg reacted to the overdevelopment of our borough and city and asked questions like, are Brooklyn's historic sacred locations going to survive? Will they be honored, remembered, and celebrated for that which they stand? Greg created his poem mosaics, his walking tours, and his poetry slams with an infinite and ever-changing set of samples and excerpts from fellow poets, young rising poets, theater artists, activists. But his favorite were three past giants of the literary world, all who frequented Brooklyn, and specifically Fort Greene Park. Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Marianne Moore's 1967 The Camperdown Elm poem was used inside Greg's poems to the majestic 100-plus-year-old trees of Fort Greene Park. In tours of Fort Greene Park, Greg was urging that we should save these London plane trees probably planted in the park during Walt Whitman's lifetime, and we should be the tree's stewards. Moore's poem is an occasional poem written in response to a Brooklyn committee that had asked Moore to help them in their efforts to protect an ancient Prospect Park tree from being cut down. It worked. That tree, still named the Camperdown Elm, is a healthy tree more than 50 years after Moore wrote her poem. Here's an excerpt. No doubt they had seen other trees, lindens, maples, sycamores, oaks, and the Paris street tree, the horse chestnut. But imagine their rapture had they come on the Camperdown Elm's massiveness, the intricate pattern of its branches, arching high, curving low in a mist of fine twigs. Props are needed, and tree food. It is still leafing, still there. Mortal, though, we must save it. It is our crowning curio. That's one of Greg's favorites. Greg used his tours to invite debate whether citizens and communities can come to terms with our country's racial divide. Segments of his tours were meditations on racial relations brought to life, often by history. Greg's tour in the park stopped by the Richard Wright Bench in the west wing of the Monument Plaza, dedicated to the author who is known to have written his Native Son novel in Fort Greene Park. Greg, often in partnership with singing and spoken word artist Nicole Mitchell, uncovered truths about the painful racial history, part of our history's past, our city's past, that can spring up at any time in our present, in our lives, if we don't remain alert and mindful of the lurking dangers of bigotry. Several times I witnessed Nicole on tours as a guest artist, and members of the tour audience choked with emotion when news of the day intersected with the point Greg was illustrating and illuminating past racial crimes close to Brooklyn's heart. And Greg created the tours to proclaim democracy. I can hear him saying that word, and you heard it in Dai's film. A daring theory, the most audacious way of thinking ever conceived by the human race, government for and by the people, where all humans are created equal. And as you have heard, and already will hear more tonight, Greg inhabited Whitman's view on this theory. Greg and Lon and their Walt Whitman Project co-commissioned a song with Fort Greene Park Conservancy and American Opera Projects, a song setting a Whitman poem from one of the early versions of Leaves of Grass, written here in Fort Greene, the Wallabout Martyrs. This song was sung during tours many times at the entrance of the crypt containing the martyrs' bones, the actual bones of those unknown soldiers, the patriots who lost their lives during the British occupation of New York City, 1776 to 83. The war ended, and 4 years later, in 1787, the Constitution of the United States was written, a document we have all heard about every minute for the past year. And as we wait in vain for patriots today who might possess traits Whitman mentions in this poem, Greg would often say, as a preface to the poem, a personal thought that Whitman wrote about, but later, unfortunately, removed from the edition of Leaves of Grass. Whitman would say, "What sobers the Brooklyn boy as he looks down the shores of the Wallabout and remembers the prison ships?" And here is a very brief excerpt from Whitman's Wallabout Martyrs to end my segment. "Greater than memory of Achilles or Ulysses, more by far to thee than the tomb of Alexander, those cartloads of old charnel ashes, scales and splints of moldy bones, once living men, once resolute courage, aspiration, strength, the stepping stones to thee today and here, America." Thanks, everybody.
Charles, thank you so much for that and for very meaningful words and also those wonderful images of Greg doing his thing. I think I passed through one of the really beautiful ones, just trying to figure out where to be, but profoundly moving. Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Julian Macron, who actually worked with Charles in the Fort Greene Park Conservancy before he went off and left us for New Haven, unbelievably. I'm sure he'll be back. Julian was Associate Director of the Fort Greene Park Conservancy and is now completing a master's degree at the Yale School of the Environment. He is an advocate for communities and a student of cities. His professional and academic work centers around how we can build more resilient and just environments, perennially inspired by the ideals of Brooklyn boosters like Whitman and, of course, Greg Trupiano. Julian, it is so wonderful to have you back with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you, Karen, for all that and for the invitation to be a part of this wonderful evening. If I do have my druthers, I will absolutely be back in Brooklyn, in no small part because of the home that you and Charles and so many of the souls here made for me there. And I think some of what I'm going to talk about and remembering Greg and all that he inspired in me and others that I saw of him speaks to so much of what you and Brad and Charles and Lon brought up, and frankly, the thought of a crowd shy Greg is something too ridiculous for me to possibly conceive of, but I guess a testament to the fact that we all grow, and that some of us grow in Brooklyn in the city, and it can be a wonderfully supportive place for all of us. And so now I want to talk a little bit about some of what Greg taught me about that. Certainly there's no small amount to say of Greg's relationship to poetry, or Greg as a poet, and so much of it has been said, but I want to point out that I believe these wonderful remarks remind us of something critically important. The poets for Whitman were every American, every average person. They exhibited what Whitman called the world's fullest poetical nature. And remembering Greg, I can't help but think of how this piece of Whitman's heart shaped our dear friend's work, and in turn, our lives. This sense of poetry, I think, is a reflection of Whitman's conception of people's relation in cities, of something fundamentally true, authentic, and expressive of our shared potential. It is why Whitman's poetry focused so intently on the life and interactions he saw in New York. It is the magic he tried to capture in the leaves, the yearning, yawping proclamation that democracy's future lives in each and any one of us, if only we are open to it and to one another. Greg, as I knew him, always aimed to make the thrill of that relation real for folks. Anyone who has heard Greg invoke the roughs and cosmos of Song of Myself knew of his care for the totality of us. That care, in turn, demanded interest. Sometime early in our friendship, when I mentioned my interest in Emerson, he leapt at the opportunity to underline Emerson's importance to Whitman, and he never forgot it. Greg would go as far as to call on me in tours to say something of the relation between the two, with some curious kind of faith in the value of what I'd have to say. I think Greg had some preternatural sense for picking out common spirit. The same interest in others was on full display in every tour I watched Greg give, and as so many people have said, there were plenty of them. Each walk was an exercise in learning something about the people who gave him some of their time, as much as it was an opportunity to preach the Bard's gospel. Each tour started with something of a game to figure out who might actually attend. Waiting by the visitor center or in the readout, as we just saw. Greg would ask whether there were any registrations, and we would reassure him that of course there were. Slowly or quickly, the day's crowd would trickle in. Greg would get in character while greeting every passerby. "Good morning! Are you here for the Whitman tour?" And not infrequently, he would wrangle members or neighbors who just minutes earlier had no intention of spending an hour and a half walking the park. Then the poetry and music started, full of hope that those of us along for the ride would walk away with a gratitude for place and the space Whitman gave us to simply be ourselves and loaf around in parks. Of course, there were words, worlds, and cosmos more to what we learned from Greg in those walks. But I'll always remember him as a preacher of Whitman's gospel, of what the city and the other had to offer by way of moral education. For fear of attempting to settle any particular moral in any of these memories, and I do think the last time that I saw Greg, if I'm not mistaken, was with Charles putting together that tour for Moore and Wright and Whitman sometime in August or September of 2 years ago now. I do want to share some words of Whitman's from late in life on the human heart that, to me, sing the truth of what Greg tried to bring out in each and every one of us. There's something in the human critter which only needs to be nudged to reveal itself. Something inestimably eloquent, precious, not always observed. It is a folded leaf, not absent because we fail to see it. The right man comes, the right hour, the leaf is lifted. The important thing to us now is the life here, the people here. Yes, that's the important, immediate thing, the earth struggle. Our effort, our task, here to build up our human social body into finer results. The daily, hourly job right here, right now. Yours, mine, the rest will come. The beyond, we are not called upon to bother about it at once. It would only confuse matters. We can make our declaration about it, say our yes, then stop. Our responsibilities are on the earth. And of aging, Walt remarked in the same volume, Walt Whitman Speaks, edited by Brenda Wineapple. For a while, I may fight off the end. For a little space, I may hold the city. But the enemy is strong and valiant. It is sure of victory. My only hope, to keep comfortable as I can and do what I may as long as I may, going down at last without disgrace. Seeing how Greg lived his responsibilities to all of us on the earth in the little space he held in the city was a daily inspiration. Having someone I can only imagine like Greg in mind, Whitman also said, we need not go into Greece to know the gods, heroes, Hercules, all the great figures, here they are, all of them. The equal of the best, waiting at our doors. It was, and continues to be, of immense comfort knowing that Greg is out there waiting for us, as always, in something like the sense of quantum time that Lon mentioned earlier. And now I think the music of the hour starts with Karin and then Nicole. So I'd like to hand it off to them and thank all of you for this wonderful opportunity to spend some time living in and recollecting memories of Greg.
Julian, thank you so much for those brilliant quotations. Wow, I'm going to have to watch this over and over again, this tribute. Everyone is speaking so eloquently about Greg. It's absolutely profoundly moving. And actually, you saying good morning the way that Greg did, it shocked me and reminded me of his incredible energy before he would get those tours underway. So thank you so much, Julian. Karin, I know you are out there. Karin was a very dear friend of Greg's. Karin is the director of the Campagna de Colombare, and Greg was on the advisory board, so they worked very closely together. Karin has recently directed More or Less I Am, which is drawn from Walt Whitman's poem, Song of Myself, and it's been on tour virtually and actually in the US and around New York City. The Merchant of Venice was in the Jewish ghetto in Venice. Babette's Feast, she staged in Portland, Maine and off Broadway. Texts and Beheadings at the Folger Theater in Washington, DC. The list goes on and on. Karin, you have done absolutely amazing work and also really with Whitman, and we're all very grateful for it. Welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Karin. I have a short letter. Dear Trupiano, it was a year minus 2 days ago that you left us. I was in Rikers with Colombari. We, Juliana, Sandro, Carlton, and I were working on King Lear with the inmates. In the vestibule, after, we got our phones. And there was a text from Sarah. Did you hear? I must have cried out. And Juliana, Sandro, and Carlton came around me like a force field, right there in the public sphere, catapulted to another pass. No, 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 no. But you know all this. Your steel focus generates hope, a rare hope, circling back to a disciplined gaze. I begin to see what you see. For you, there is no talking without doing. Your words, your bonds. We have unfinished symphonies, dreams, hopes, imaginings of performing More or Less I Am at Greenwood Cemetery in Camden, New Jersey, in 99 Ryerson Street, in New Orleans, and in the world at large. Not yet, I can hear you say. Not yet. I'm listening, Trupiano, as you tend inward to me and I outward to you. So continues our debrief. With love to Greg from Manhattan. Here is some of our More or Less I Am, starting in the middle.
of fog in the air and beetles rolling balls of dung. Through me, forbidden voices. Voices of sexes and lusts. Voices veiled, and I remove the veil. Voices indecent by me, clarified and transfigured. I do not press my finger across my mouth. I hold as delicate around the bowels as around the head and heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. I believe in the flesh and the appetites. Hearing and feeling are miracles, and each part and side of me is a miracle. Divine am I inside and out, and I make holy whatever I touch, or am touched from. The scent of these armpits is aroma finer than breath. The head is more than churches, or Bibles, or creeds. Immense have been the preparations for me. Faithful and friendly the arms that have helped me. Cycles buried my cradle, rowing and rowing like cheerful boatmen. For room to me the stars kept aside in their own rings. They sent influences to look after what was to hold me.
Before I was born out of my mother, generations guided me. My embryo has never been torn. Nothing could overlay it.
For if the nebula could go here to an orb, a long, slow strata piled to rest it on. Vast vegetables gave it sustenance. Monstrous soroids transported it in their mouths and deposited it with care.
All forces have been steadily employed to complete and delight me. Now I stand on this spot with my soul.
Karen, thank you so much for allowing us to show that magnificent clip of More or Less I Am. Can you just tell people where they can find that?
Yes, that you can find it on our website, which is columbari.org. And we have 3 new, all of them dedicated to Greg, with little love notes to him at the end. And they'll be launched this week at Dartmouth and at Colgate. Yeah.
A tremendous thing. Yeah, that's why I thought you mentioned Greg at the end. That's why I let it roll a little bit, but I guess it's after the credits.
Yeah, it's after the credits. It's at the very end.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I think we may also upload these to the Whitman Initiative site. So those will be visible, the various episodes of More or Less I Am. Absolutely transportive and so full of the goodness and love and open arm democracy that Greg also represented. Thank you so much, Karen. I know we are at the hour, but my goodness, we could not do this tribute without our next guest. Nicole Joy Mitchell is waiting in the wings for us. She is a contralto, an opera singer, and a proud native of Brooklyn, New York. Just like Greg, she's performed all over the country and abroad. She made her Metropolitan Opera debut during the 2019 and 20 season as part of the ensemble of the highly acclaimed James Robinson production of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. She's performed with the American Opera Project, now the American Opera Project, that was Charles Jardin's project, singing the works of new composers. For several years, Nicole has been the featured soloist on the Fort Greene Park Conservancy tours, celebrating the history of Brooklyn and Walt Whitman through song. And of course, you saw some photos of Nicole already in this presentation. Last year, Nicole debuted with Santa Fe Opera in the role of Fannie Lou Hamer in Is This America, adapted from This Little Light of Mine, the story of Fannie Lou Hamer by Diana Solomon Glover, who wrote the libretto, and Chandler Carter, who wrote the music. Nicole has brought so much joy and dimension to our Whitman world. And she has worked so very closely with Greg Trupiano through the years. Nicole, thank you so much for bringing us to a really beautiful finale tonight.
Hello. It is an honor to be here. I love Greg very much. I won't speak too much because I won't be able to sing, and I want to give my best. But one of the things I can say is that I learned so much from Greg, and I admired him. I admired his sense of wonder. I have done many, many tours with Greg and in Fort Greene Park, and it never got old for me. I always learned something new, and I was enthused because he was enthused. So I'm going to get down to singing. The first piece I will sing is one verse from Walt Whitman's ode that he wanted to be sung in 1846 on the 4th of July at Fort Greene. And it was wonderful singing that song because it was set to the Star Spangled Banner, which was at the time was not the national anthem. And I enjoyed singing this verse, and sometimes there were two verses, because people would always stop and you could see on their faces, oh, I know the tune, but what are those words? And so it would cause them to lean in, and it was wonderful. And it created conversations with people you didn't even know who were alive. And so it was wonderful. So it created community, and Greg was about that. So the second song that I will sing is Shall We Gather at the River? And it was written in Brooklyn by Robert Lowry, who was a minister at the Hanson Baptist Church in Brooklyn, in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And it was written in 1864. And Brooklyn-born composer Aaron Copland loved the tune and took it and made it his, put his own touches on it. So that's the second piece that I will be singing. And I dedicate these both to Greg. Getting to get my pitch. Oh, God of Columbia, oh, shield of the free, where our forefathers championed America's. Oh, I'm so sorry. Got a little. Oh, God of Columbia, oh, shield of the free, more grateful to you than the fanes of old story. Must the blood-bedewed soil, the red battleground be, where our forefathers championed America's glory. Then how priceless the worth of the sanctified earth we are standing on now. Lo, the slope of its girth, where the martyrs were buried, nor pressed tears or stones marked their golden coffins, their white holy bones. Shall we gather at the river where bright angels' feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Soon we'll reach the shining river. Soon our pilgrimage will cease. Soon our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God, that flows by the throne of God.
Oh, my dear Nicole, thank you so much. Yes, we will gather by the river or anywhere else. If you are singing the way, I think we would all follow your voice anywhere. And I know that we are not the only ones hearing it right now. We love you, Greg. We know you are stopping out there waiting for us somewhere. We will not stop celebrating your life. And I hope everyone here and maybe some new faces will join us next year. We'll do this maybe every year to continue to celebrate a magnificent Brooklyn individual who gave meaning to local cultural activism and a global impact. I want to thank all of the guests today for making this such a rich experience. And for our audience too, thank you so much for joining in, and be sure to join us again next month, March 16th, for another great Brooklynite. We'll be talking to Jason Koo back then. Meanwhile, good night, everyone. And Greg, we'll see you soon.